Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our series of That One Play episodes. And tonight, we have one a lot of people have probably forgotten about by now, and that is opening day of 2014, Steve Smith's 80-yard catch that put the Ravens ahead of the Bengals late in that ball game. And here to talk about with me is Brad McGowan. Brad, how you doing?
Doing great, Ken. How are you?
Always great to have you on. Look forward to our discussions always, Brad. But I kind of want you picked this play for a certain reason. Kind of tell us, why, first of all, and then lead us up to the moment and why this was a significant moment for you.
Sure. I picked this play for a number of reasons, but I think the primary reason is that Steve Smith was possibly my favorite veteran player that the Ravens ever signed late in his career. And if he'd have been a Raven his whole career, he'd have probably been at least top 5 Raven for me. But I just loved his tenacity and his fire and his toughness. And this play epitomized that. And when I think about the current Ravens, I think we could really stand for some fire and toughness in the receiving room right now.
I mean, that's one of the things I remember Marshall Yanda talking about at the podium. He's like, they just had a fight, I think, in camp, which happens in camp. You get some little things going. Sometimes you get a really big one, but they have some little fights that happen. And they asked Marshall, who's the player on the team you don't want to get in a fight with? And he goes, I don't know, probably Steve Smith. You think about the difference in size between these two, but Steve Smith, just a very tough dude. And, you wouldn't want to have to try and peel him off yourself if you were in Yanda's position.
In preparation for this pod, I just indulged myself in watching Steve Smith highlights. And 5'10", 190-pound guy. He was fast coming out of school, but at his first touch I think the first touch he ever had in the league was a kick return for a touchdown. So he played special teams, but man, he was so ferocious. And the way he attacked the ball in the air and was a complete wide receiver at his size is so impressive. I mean, he's 8th all time in career receiving yards. And, one of the things I've bemoaned about some of the receivers we've had in the last several years, the folks that we've drafted, even the ones that are really good, I thought Hollywood Brown was a pretty quality receiver, but even the bigger guys just don't attack the ball the way that Steve Smith did. And it's just the attitude and ferocity that he brought to the position it just was incredible. And I remember this was the opening game of the 2014 season, but I remember exactly where I was once Steve Smith had been released the previous spring when it was announced that Baltimore signed him. I remember specifically where I was because as soon as he was released, I thought that's a guy we should go get because his attitude embodies what it means to be a Raven. I thought, in rewatching his highlights, he was made to play in the AFC North.
Yeah, he definitely had that attitude. There's only been one other receiver I can really remember the Ravens having who had his degree of toughness, and that was Anquan Boldin. Anquan Boldin going up for the ball on 3rd and 1 in the Super Bowl and just taking it away from Culliver. And if Culliver hadn't gotten his arm out of there, I think he would have taken it right off. It's just the thing, the way he stood over the Patriots in the end zone, right under the goalposts on a couple of zipper plays that he went up to get. I mean, just exciting as hell, and obviously that kind of tenacity very fun to watch. But all the other receivers, even the good ones, none of them really had the toughness. Torrey Smith and Michael Jackson and Derek Alexander and Kadri Ishmael, good receivers, all of them. Nothing wrong with them. I take any of them right now for certain, but none of them had the same tenacity.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Boldin. He's the other top end veteran that we signed, in my opinion, that I always loved. A guy tough as nails, and both, I think they were similar. They were later stages of their career. Boldin was younger when we brought him over in the trade, but both of them had physical limitations. Steve Smith was undersized, and Boldin, I think, famously ran a 4.7 40.
He definitely didn't have all that when he came to the Ravens.
Exactly. And both of them were such ferocious competitors, so tough. I remember we're getting a little bit off topic, but I remember a play from Bolden's career when he was in Arizona and he ran a post against the Jets and got hit head on by Eric Smith, the safety. And I'm pretty sure he had to be taken off on a stretcher and he had to have his face repaired.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he played, I think, a week or two later. Like, talk about toughness. I mean, those guys were incredible.
It's a little bit like people my age may remember Muhammad Ali had his jaw broken by Ken Norton and finished the fight. And that was fairly incredible for its day as well. And then came back and it wasn't his next fight, I don't think, but it might have been like 2 fights later is the fight against Foreman that he won in the Rumble of Jungle. So the other thing about Steve Smith I want to go back to for a second is that the 2013 offseason was much like this offseason for the Ravens. The Ravens don't have any money to spend on anybody. In fact, they have to figure out which cuts they have to live with. Today, they let Calais Campbell go. So we're recording this on March 13th, and we certainly have no reason to expect the Ravens are going to sign anybody. So had a little bit of a discussion about wide receivers today. And, I was like, basically the other thing that happened today, Josh Oliver signed to a big contract by the Vikings, which is frankly unbelievable.
So, I was shocked at that contract.
And last year, he wasn't on anybody's make the roster list. I mean, he's the big upset that busted everybody's, entry. And now he, not only does he make the team, great year as a blocker, does some things as a receiver for the first time as a Raven with about 14 catches, I think it was. Some of them for decent distance and whatnot. And all of a sudden there's a market for him. He's going to leave the Ravens, generate a compensatory draft pick, which is unbelievable. Well, I posted that, first of all, we need to wish Oliver the best just because he played hard for the Ravens. That's enough. But not only that, if he plays well and continues to play well for the Vikings, it's a good thing for the Ravens because they'll get a higher compensatory draft pick because that's part of the formula is how well he plays in his first year with the Vikings here. But I posted that and I said, we should wish him the best. And somebody posted back that if the Ravens get a compensatory draft pick for Josh Oliver, it will mean they have not addressed their wide receiver problems in free agency. And I'm paraphrasing slightly, but what do you think is going to happen? There is no signing in free agency coming up a wide receiver this year. At least I don't see it. And by the time this airs, which could be a month from now, I could already be wrong, but more than likely I'm already right.
I frankly have no idea where we sit right now. We're in between the legal tampering period and the formal kickoff of the league year, which is in a couple days. So because Lamar doesn't have an agent, or rather because he is tagged, teams cannot negotiate with him until Wednesday. So frankly, we have no idea what's going to happen. I think the thing about the situation that is the most frustrating to me, Lamar has every right to try to get the best deal out there for him. That's his right, and it is in his best interest to do so. But it makes the way his scenario with no agent just makes it so incredibly difficult for the team to conduct the rest of their business. And I haven't really heard anyone else in the media say this, but I believe one of the reasons that he is not as desirable on the open market by other teams is because it's so hard to do business with a guy like this in this situation. And even, I saw someone post on Twitter, Deshaun Watson got that fully guaranteed deal and the Browns were able to renegotiate that deal to free up a ton of cap space. Well, he has an agent. Lamar hasn't really given any indication that he is open to negotiation, like mid-season, mid-contract, or any of those things. And that's just so difficult for a team that has to balance a roster of 53 players to manage that with an unknown like that.
We need to get back on track with the play. I don't disagree with you about a lot of the things. And I think the Lamar situation is so complex. It's an hour discussion about what's going on. But part of the problem for other teams is not just that Lamar doesn't have an agent. It's that in addition to whatever they pay him, they have to, the Ravens have the enormous negotiating advantage of there's 2 first-round draft picks that they have to pony up in addition on the deal. So why bid up a quarterback market? When you have to get a quarterback, a higher Lamar Jackson contract with the Ravens means you're going to have to pay more for whoever your guy is. The Raiders, I think, did the smart thing today. They went after Jimmy Garoppolo and signed him. And that deal looks really cheap, by the way, $22.5 million per year. It looks really cheap to me, honestly. If you want a game manager, he might be, he might have been a good guy to try and get.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Brett, let's come back to Steve Smith and this opening day catch against the Bengals. So in 2013, obviously a down year for the Ravens. We went into the offseason because the point was that they didn't have an option to sign anybody in the offseason. But 2014, their first big signing after the kind of the moratorium and the Flacco contract got figured out and all that was Steve Smith.
Yeah, and so one of the other reasons I wanted to talk about this play specifically, but this team, the 2014 Ravens, they finished third in the division, but this was the team that lost to the Patriots in the divisional round and the famous illegal/non-illegal formation game. And they had two 14-point leads in that game. They lost 35-31, and the Pats went on to win the Super Bowl that year, beating Seattle. So this was probably, by the end of the season, this was one of the best Ravens teams post Super Bowl before Lamar got there and had a really good shot. So this was a really good quality team. And going into week one,
I'm just going to say a lot like the 2014 teams, a lot like the 2022 team. They were good enough. They frankly were the best team in the AFC North, particularly if you look at things like point differential or any number of factors that you might look at. They were a lot better than Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and still managed to finish third, which is disappointing, obviously. And this Cincinnati game, frankly, was the difference. This opening game lost to Cincinnati, despite the Steve Smith touchdown. But talk us through that game and the play in particular.
Sure. So it was a home opener against the Bengals. The team started out. Baltimore was quite flat. Flacco was pretty bad in the first half. The Bengals kicked 5 field goals in the first half, and Baltimore had a chance to go for the end zone on the last play of the first half, and Flacco scrambled, lost track of time, and got sacked with time running out. We were in position to kick a field goal, and so we go into half down 15-0 to the hated Bengals. And this was of the Bengals era teams. There was the Chad Ochocinco and the Hushmanzada era that gave the Ravens fits. There was the Vontaze Burfict, AJ Green era that this team was. And then there's the current, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase era. And I think the Vontaze Burfict era Bengals was probably my most hated rival. They were just incredibly chippy, and he embodied chippiness. And that was this team in this time.
To me, this is the Carlos Dunlap era as well. And the Bengals had their way with a 4-man pass rush against the Ravens. And that's where a lot of Joe Flacco's problems came when he was throwing into a zone defense, you had Flacco where you wanted him a lot of the time. He has tremendous arm talent, tremendous arm strength. But if you can rush the passer with 4 and have 7 in coverage, which the Bengals often did, tip balls at the line of scrimmage, bad things started to happen to Joe.
And this game had all of those things. I rewatched the condensed version of this game, and Joe is just dry. He threw over 60 times in this game, and he's just firing balls. They're getting batted down left and right. Guys are running into double coverages and into, tight zone windows, and he's just trying to fire it in there. And for most of the first half of this game and into the second half, they were just out of sorts. But, they got the ball at the beginning of the second half. They managed to score 10 unanswered points. And so the score was at this point 15-10. The Bengals got the ball, and the Ravens forced them to punt. And so now we're all the way into the middle of the fourth quarter. So the Ravens get the ball back. I think it was around their 10-yard line. They convert a first down. They get a holding penalty on the first down. And they ultimately are in a 3rd and 14 situation on their own 20-yard line. And this is when the play happens in the fourth quarter. And, Steve Smith, this is his opening game in Baltimore. He had an average game to this point, had 4 drops up to this point. Flacco had been targeting him a lot, but again, Flacco had been throwing the ball all over the place. So it's 3rd and 14. Flacco drops back. The Bengals only rush 3. Flacco steps up in the pocket, and he starts going to his left, is waving his arm. A defensive lineman is chasing him, and he manages to flip his hips and just launch the ball downfield like, only Joe could do. And all of a sudden you see Steve Smith running wide open down the field.
You see that play, and whenever Flacco moved to his left, it was death. And it never worked out for him in the career. In fact, the Mile High Miracle game wouldn't have been the kind of game it was for the Ravens had there been an interception that ended up being out of bounds, fortunately, by the Broncos on a move where Flacco had rolled left. But there were so many plays in his career where he tried to go left, tried to reset himself, and it just never really worked. This play is really one of the few where it did. And I'm not saying he didn't have a few dump offs to Ray Rice that were to that side, off the things, but in terms of ever getting a ball into the mid or long range, moving his left, that was not Flacco's way of doing it. Other right-handed quarterbacks even who can backpedal a little bit to escape a pocket, like Brady could at one time, like Ben Roethlisberger could. They could extend plays and make them outside the pocket. It was not Flacco's thing going left, not at all.
No. And he barely gets this throw off before the defensive lineman gets there, but he somehow manages the ball is placed perfectly in stride for Smith, and he catches it in stride. And then the best part of this play, and the thing that epitomizes Steve Smith, is he turns around as he's running towards the end zone, sees Pac-Man Jones, and he somehow just grabs him and just throws him down in front of him. And every time I see this play, I cannot for the life of me think of how this is not a face mask. It looks like he just grabs his face mask and throws it, but there's no replay that they show it from the front angle that I've seen it. And they don't throw a flag. So I presume he grabs him on his chest, but just the sheer will that he displays in this moment to grab a 230-pound safety and just throw him with one arm in front of him and then score this touchdown and put the Ravens up by 1 in this opening game. Like, it is just such an incredible play. And it was so exciting in the moment. And then, of course, sadly, the Ravens give up a 77-yard touchdown 2 plays later to A.J. Green. And he's covered by my other favorite obscure Raven, Shockey Brown, which I hadn't remembered he was still on the team at that point.
Yeah, Shockey would lose his spot on the team a little later that season by not being on the field on a 3rd and long play. Ravens got a sack anyway, but it was still the end of Shockey Brown.
Yeah, but I jumped a little bit. I want you to comment on Steve Smith's epic stiff arm.
It's stiff arm is not even the right word for it. I mean, he yanked the guy down. Jersey, shoulder, he had a little bit of everything as he went down, but he flipped him across the front of his body, which is just so unusual for a wide receiver to do that. And then, of course, he went in the end zone, and then he starts celebrating in a way that was very Steve Smith-like, and the crowd going wild. It would have been probably, remembered many times as often, brought up many times as often had the Ravens gone on to win this game. And that's the case of a lot of these plays that were really special in Ravens history they weren't able to finish it off, kind of thing. And unfortunately, this is one of those. And it was so quick. The transition was so quick. You mentioned there's a kickoff, and then the second play from scrimmage after that, Green has the touchdown. And what a disappointing, turn of events. But they missed the 2-point conversion. They were up 16-15 at that point. And then they gave the ball back.
Yeah, they gave the ball back. I mean, Cincinnati converted the 2 points, so they were up 7. Baltimore got the ball back, and they drove down the field, but then Flacco took consecutive sacks, not quite in the red zone, and that ended the game. And, they ended up this was the first season of Kubiak as offensive coordinator as well. The only season as offensive coordinator, and this ended up being Joe's best statistical season. So, they were able to turn the season around and still had a pretty remarkable season. The outcome of this game was disappointing, but it was great seeing Steve Smith. And, in prepping for this, I just went back and looked at his numbers. He played 3 years in Baltimore from age 35 to 37, had 1,000 years his first year. His second season, he had 670 yards through 7 games before he tore his Achilles. So he was on a torrid pace at age 36. And it was just remarkable that he even came back after the Achilles at age 37 to play as much as he did that last season in 2016.
Yeah, the 2015 season, he had 9.2 yards per target. So that's right up there with the best Ravens years of all time. 3 times in his career, he was over 10 yards per target, that's really doing the job as a wide receiver. And Flacco had a lot of short throws, and he was not conducive to producing high yards per target numbers for his receivers either.
Yeah. I mean, Smith was one of those rare guys who would go up and get the ball in traffic down the field as 5'10", as a 5'10" receiver. He played the game much bigger than he was.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great Ravens, that's for sure. The 2014 season, I'll always share this kind of viewpoint with you, is that it was a team that was just so close. I mean, they were right there. They made do with a lot of things. C.J. Mosley was in his rookie year, and he was good. And they still had Darryl Smith. They had good inside linebackers. They had a lot of problems in the secondary with injuries. And it led to Rashaan Melvin playing a very key role down the stretch. Rashaan Melvin, by the way, will be remembered as a Raven probably for what happened in that playoff game at New England when he was toasted up pretty well by Tom Brady. But he had one hell of a stretch drive for the Ravens too. He played very well leading up to that game, and it's really a shame that that we remember him in the way we do. And incredibly, he's still in the National Football League. It is now 8 years have passed, and he still played this last year.
Wow, that is incredible. I remember when he got elevated off the practice squad that year, and he did, to your point, like down the stretch, he played pretty well. I mean, they were decimated by injuries in the secondary, but Belichick and Brady exposed him in that playoff game. And, that's one of the tougher playoff losses. They were up 14-0 and subsequently 28-14. And the Pats came back both times. And, Baltimore again had a chance at the end of the game. I think Flacco threw the ball to Steve Smith or to Torrey Smith, and it was intercepted. He was double covered, but man, that was a tough loss, but that was a good team.
Yeah, I need to correct myself, by the way. Rashaan Melvin played in 21, did not play in 22. So he probably is. He may have turned in his retirement paperwork by now. He may not have, but still a remarkable career. Lots of things to like about him. And that 2014 playoff loss at New England was one of the really tough ones to take. And, you mentioned, losing 2 14-point leads in that game. Of course, that New England team then had the Deflategate thing hanging over their head the next week. And of course, the Ravens' potential solution of it, just let the Ravens and Colts play for the AFC Championship.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Speaking of retirement papers, in doing some of the research on Steve Smith, I was reminded that when he formally retired, he sent a note to the commissioner saying that he was he would formally stop antagonizing defensive backs.
That's good. All right. Well, Brad, always a pleasure to talk football with you, and remember a great moment from Ravens history. And hopefully this one will be one that a lot of people have kind of forgotten by now, and they got a nice reminder of it and a smile on their face. Tell folks where they can talk football with you.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at MC Bradley.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you want to do a That One Play episode, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'll get right back to you. We'll be recording very quickly. If you have an idea for anything that hasn't been covered so far, and there's a ton of plays that have been covered. There's another ton of plays that haven't been covered. Love to do more of this. Probably could keep this spotted in throughout the offseason. We're getting into draft season now, so it's going to be more content of that type, more reacting to free agency moves and whatnot. But there'll be lots of opportunities this offseason for people to do this if they'd like to. And I've really enjoyed these episodes of these talks. And particularly with you, Brad, you've done 2 of these now and really appreciate it. I hope you'll take the opportunity to do another. If let a month or so pass, and we'll get back together again. Thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely, Ken. I'm always thinking of plays that give me an excuse to talk about other things related to the Ravens. In this case, just Steve Smith and how enjoyable he was to have on our squad.
All right. We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.